Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to now take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome as well as invite on the stage our eminent panelists for this session. And now I'd like to hand over to Mr. Shankar Iyer to kindly moderate this session. Over to you, Mr. Iyer.
Good evening, everybody. Beauty, they say, lies in the eye of the beholder. The state of the economy similarly depends on who you ask about it. The rupee is falling, but you can always argue that other currencies are falling more. Our interest rates are high. You can always argue that they're better than before. GDP growth is sliding, but we are still the fastest growing among the fastest growing economies. We have a huge fiscal deficit, but our internal debt to GDP ratio is low. We have a current account deficit, but we still have a large domestic economy. The glass is half full for some and half empty for others. Mr. Anand Sharma gave a very passionate, eloquent exposition. One of the quiet reformers in this government. He spoke with some amount of anguish, and if I may say, Anandji, some amount of hurt in the way the economic management of the country is being described at different places. So how real is the doomsday scenario? What is the extent of the gloom? Which are the worst sectors? And since Piyush Goyal is here, how responsible is the opposition for the mess? Can we re-engineer policy, or do we need to re-engineer politics? What can bankers do? So I'm going to address the first question to Mr. Anand Sharma. It must be really painful to be in government and hear people say that the only solution for the crisis is election. We heard you give some amount of empirical evidences, some amount of what could happen, things improving. Are they saying things are improving? Anecdotally bataiye.
In all sincerity, when I talked of the narrative or the discourse, and I do believe that despite the challenges that we are facing, which I myself admit, because we look very silly if we say there is no crisis, no challenge. We cannot be in denial. But when such a situation confronts you, are you going to panic and run away? Are you going to bring down the institutions and further contribute in spreading despair and gloom? Or you address it in a pragmatic manner to turn it around, to restore confidence is the first thing. Second is to change the narrative. When I meet people, when you're saying that what people say, it's a question of whom you meet. The person you meet, that somebody will still have positive things to say that, yes, you can turn it around. These good things are also being done. And it's important that in a democracy, we acknowledge both the good and the bad. That recognition is important. We cannot put things that just in black and white. Equally important it is to understand that we are a very complex country, and to bring about changes and reforms is not easy. So much of positive work which has been done and where we are, the nation needs to be informed.
I'm going to take the discussion to Ms. Arundhati Bhattacharya, who heads one of India's largest bank. Ms. Bhattacharya, how bad do things look to you as a lender? There must be some sectors doing well, but which are the worst affected ones? And are they policy-related decisions? Are they structural, or are they cyclical?
Now, in all of this, are we to say that the financial sector hasn't contributed? I think the financial sector also has contributed, and there I include the banks. A power project is going to be there for 40 long years. How do we give them the money to carry out the project? The money given is for 10 years or 12 years. Now, why is that? Because banks have an inherent asset liability management, and they cannot run big mismatches. Now, what does that do to the project? What happens is the entire repayments are front-ended. As a result, if there is the slightest bit of slippage, either in execution or in coming up to the demand expectations, this particular project is bound to get stressed. Now, all over the world, this is now not how long-term projects are funded. Projects are funded in a different manner, where the first 5 years, the repayments are much lower, and subsequently, the loans get refinanced. When it gets refinanced and the tenor gets extended, it is not considered restructure, because it is a total refinancing of a project that has already come on stream. Now, these are things that we have to develop in the financial markets. Currently, we do not even have institutions which can come and take out the banks, or even the banks themselves, if they want to refinance, they do not have the regulatory prescription for doing so, unless they have projected it right in the beginning. And right at the beginning, they cannot do it again, as I said, because it will be taken as
Do we also
ALMs.
lack instruments, ma'am? Long-term instruments?
Sure.
And another, you mentioned about projects which get completed but don't do well because of the ecosystem, and projects which don't get completed. But there are projects which get completed, like gas-powered power projects, coal-fired power projects, steel mills which are ready but don't get iron ore. How do you classify them, and what's the solution there?
Actually, the solution there is we have to press for the completion of these projects and for the inputs to be acquired from wherever possible. Because the assets are on the ground. The demand is also going to come. In this country, with the kind of population we have, the kind of demography we have, and I think, as the Honorable Minister rightly said, the kind of aspirations of the youth, if we are to meet those aspirations, all of these projects that have come on stream will be very much required. What we need again is to get together and determine how best to see that they actually can become productive. And to that extent, to enable the banking system to continue to support them till such time as they are able to turn around.
One last question, ma'am. Do you think NPA, the definition of NPA, needs to be contextual?
Actually, again, as I said, NPAs are different in different geographies. For instance, there is a very large car maker who has Indian operations as well as foreign operations. When we extended the loan for their foreign operations, it was not considered restructuring. However, had we done the same thing over here, in all probability, it would have got that tag. However, in the foreign context, what happens? An NPL, if a project itself is not generating enough cash to repay, that would be considered an NPL, even if the group may be repaying those liabilities.
Yes. I'm going to take the discussion now to Dr. Subir Gokan, who brings a unique set of skills and competencies. He's been part of a rating agency. He's been part of the Reserve Bank of India as Deputy Governor. So Subir, how bad does it look? I mean, there's a lot of blame game that we see. Mr. Anand Sharma spoke about one kind of blame game, but within the government, there's another kind of blame game, which is in whose tenure what happened. And the one question that's central to that argument is that we held on to the stimulus too long. The other argument is the RBI went late into the interest rate hikes. These are all, of course, hindsight 2020 discussions. But was the stimulus really that large? And did we hold on to it too long?
Instead of looking at it from the perspective of who is to blame or who did what, let me look at it in terms of the developments in the macroeconomic situation that actually took us to this particular situation. We had a period of rising inflation from 2009. In fact, immediately after the crisis appeared to have abated, inflation became a problem very quickly. And to see why that happened, we actually have to go back a little bit before the crisis, when we did face very high inflation. We were in a very, very dangerous inflationary situation then. The crisis gave us some relief, which of course was responded to globally by stimulus. So the inflation pressures that were already latent and already sort of very close to the surface resurfaced very quickly, and by late 2009 we were already facing a return to that kind of inflation pressure. What was, I think, very important then was the realization that food had now, instead of being a monsoon-driven inflationary process, was now a permanent and a structural inflationary pressure. And I think that changed the way in which policymakers had to look at inflation, because when you have a permanent source of inflation transforming out of what is essentially seen as a temporary source, it has a direct bearing on how monetary policy can respond. So tightening started then. It was aggravated at some point with the response of commodity prices to QE2 in late 2010. We saw oil prices jump, if you recall, from about $85 a barrel in October to about 110 very quickly by January. So that was a huge inflationary shock at a time when the earlier pressures had still not fully been contained. So that took us to a different inflation trajectory in 2011. From that point on, a combination of factors which in fact impacted the investment activity, I think, started this process of slowdown. Obviously, high interest rates contributed, but other factors came in as well. But let's look at the situation before the currency started to depreciate this year, middle of this year. At that point, the interest rate cycle started to ease. There was a total of 125 basis points up to May. Everybody's forecast for 13-14 was higher than 5%, which was essentially indicating some sort of recovery. The average, I would say, was at 5.7, 5.8. And all of that was predicated on basically some stability returning both to the currency and essentially that interest rates were starting to ease down because core inflation was coming down, even though headline remained high. So that scenario, it was consistent with a sort of business cycle turnaround, not a dramatic, return to 9% or whatever, because investment was low. But you still had a business cycle recovery in sight. There wasn't a single forecast before May 1st
that it had bottomed out
that said that growth this year was going to be slower than it had been last year. Then we turned to the period during which the currency started to move. And there I think we have to look at proximate causes, because you can't have such a sharp change in the situation and blame it on cosmic factors. There had to be a direct precipitating influence, and that's what I call a proximate cause. I think the proximate cause, to my mind, was the development of the current account deficit over the last 2 years. From 2010-11, we were about 2.8, 2.9%, coming close to the what we consider a danger zone. 2011-12, it was 4.2, 12-13 is 4.8. That clearly swung the whole equation very dramatically to a high degree of vulnerability. And when we had the shock, we've had episodes before, but when you had the shock in May of 2013 with the tapering expectation, the rollback, that level of vulnerability, I think, really put us in a very difficult situation. So from what was a normal business cycle recovery, again, not dramatic, but clearly a bottoming out kind of scenario, to now which a situation where everybody is scaled down their forecasts to below last year's. Most forecasts now are below 5%. Really reflects the impact that high level of vulnerability has on the overall macroeconomic situation. So proximate causes, what are the proximate causes? In the 2 years that I was comparing, beginning and end, the two immediate causes of the explosion in the current account deficit are the decline in iron ore exports and the increase in coal imports. So this $12, $13, $14 billion hit, and there are indirect impacts on steel and scrap and other things, is really what's taken the current account deficit from somewhere around 3.5%, 3% to over 4%. It's a 1% hit directly. And on the more persistent factors have been oil and gold, where, of course, those have been problems for. Well, gold has been growing. It's not constant.
No, but they've been constant.
They've been there. They've been on the scene for some time. So I think when we look at reversing the situation, we have to address these proximate causes. We cannot find a solution that bypasses them or ignores them. They're the 800-pound gorilla. They're there. You cannot do anything without confronting them head on. And there, I think, how we solve the mining issue, how we solve the coal issue, they are clearly not going to happen overnight. But what we need is a strategy that gets these two sectors active and with some expectation that we will substitute as soon as possible imported coal with domestic coal. Basically, every time you grow fast, and this is true not just of economies, it's true of companies also. You always tend to overlook or marginalize, put aside some critical stress factors. So you have a great run and then you hit those brick walls.
So in a sense, this can be described a pit stop.
So I'm saying that the kind of reform dividend that we got after many years of doing the right things, we have to keep that process going. That's a treadmill. And if you do those, then you get these surges, which is what, the way we're going to go.
We don't know where we are headed. So the undone part, is it significant?
I think we have gone through these crises before. We went through it in 91. We came out of it successfully. It was the same Prime Minister who was then Finance Minister who led the charge on reform. So things can change more quickly than I think people are looking at it today. When you look at it at 2 in the morning, it may be very dark outside, but by 5 it is bright. Therefore, I think we are really...
So we are somewhere between 3 and 4 or 1?
Yeah, I would think so. I think we're about... it can be set right far more quickly and with certain confidence given to both internal and external investors. And that can happen only post-election, in my view.
Okay, now I'm going to turn the discussion to Piyush Goyal, business person. Put on your hat of the financial wizard and say where we are on a scale of 0 to 10 in terms of crisis. Is this fixable, and how much participation, partnership does BJP intend to do in... this is a national crisis. This is not a UPA crisis anymore.
As you reflect on what happened in the last few years, I think you realize it's been a period of lost opportunities. We had a crisis way back in 2008, but we've already had the Honorable Prime Minister and the Finance Minister acknowledge that it was not only trying to fix the crisis in 2008, but the problem started a little before that, when we saw fiscal profligacy, we saw funds which should have gone into capital investments of the government, into infrastructure, being diverted to political ends, to electoral gains. And since that period, and followed by the Lehman crisis, when possibly, as Subir just said, the fiscal stimulus was there in large parts of the world. But if you look at countries like China, they gave a fiscal stimulus, but used that to create investment-led growth. Unfortunately, we in India focused on consumption-led growth. We used our resources more to spread the money, to dole out the money, rather than create infrastructure. And over the last 10-year period, we have gradually brought down the government's spending on capital expenditure from 23% in 2004 to 11.72% for the year ended March 13. And I personally feel that's been one of the single most very, very sad reasons that has caused this country and brought us to this state of distress. But at the same time, I don't think it's a period that we have to give up on. I'm an optimist. I mean, all through the day today, people have been asking me what will happen to the dollar. And I personally thought it will come down to 55, but I think maybe 55, 57 in the next 2 or 3 months. But please don't hold me to it and make any hedging bets on that. I'm not making predictions like Subir used to do. But I personally feel the economy, nothing is lost. What we need right now is leadership and vision. If only we had a visionary leadership, which could not just try and divert issues or try to play a double game, where on the one hand you're talking of fiscal consolidation, on the one hand you're talking of growth, setting things right and infrastructure, setting the CAD and FD right and stuff like that. And on the other hand, you're once again playing election politics for finances. I think that kind of double message kills the investment sector.
So I'm going to sort of shrink this debate, move next to, and we're going to have like a buzzer round. Ms. Srivastav, you're in the Department of Financial Services. Do you see things moving faster now? Do you see hope when people come to you and talk about their problems?
We have to admit the problem, and we have to be focused to deal with the problem. So that would be the need of the hour. And in any case, if we keep criticizing and if we keep blaming, is ultimately going to affect this country and the people of this country.
Okay. So your mantra is confess, detox, and act. I'm going to take the question next to Mr. Lango. You're in a gas, infrastructure, long-term issue. Quickly, what's your sense? Are things sort of improving? Because you had issues of pricing, you had issues of tax policy, all of that. Do you see quickly, if you could tell us, that are things improving from your perspective? There's been some action in the last 3-4 months.
The government and all the policymakers are very focused on how do we improve exports or how do we reduce import. I just want to share one thought, that there is an opportunity to substitute one form of import with another. We import about $140 billion worth of oil every year, some of them for value-adding export purposes. Oil, gas can easily replace oil requirements. Gas is available for equal molecule at 2/3 of the price. So if you import more gas to reduce import of more oil, you are talking about saving about $25 billion in a year. All that is required is ensuring that every state has a pipeline network which is similar to Gujarat. Gujarat gas contribution in the primary energy mix is 25%. National average is 9%. In US, gas mix is 25%.
Seventh chit now, 4 minutes left. So 2 minutes to you, for you. As a banker, as one of the fastest growing private banks, where do you see the economy? Things improving? Or do you see light at the end of the tunnel? What's your perspective?
There are 2 points I would like to make. That it's not just about, the gloom doom. It's how we can convert the current adversity into measurable opportunities. And I think there are fantastic ways of doing that. You can do that through agribusiness. You can do that through calibrated policy dispensation towards micro SME enterprises. I think there is still scope in infrastructure, which if done with the right measures, can create some outcomes. I think we need to look at what we can do on innovation and entrepreneurial funding through banks and otherwise. When you look at all this, the sigma, all of this is respectable growth. It may not be % immediately, maybe there's still...
But it does give you room for recovery. Yeah. So you're saying, if I could sort of condense what you said, is basically the much used and abused phrase, yes, we can sort of move ahead.
Nobody is looking at the sigma of these measures. The fact is the best opportunity for India has always been in adversity.
Okay. I'm going to take the last point from Rajkumar Dhut, who wear 2 hats, one of a politician, member of parliament, another of an entrepreneur. So he has in one side the story of riches in terms of an income flow from oil exploration and petroleum. On the other side is in manufacturing, where he is hurting from import of components. What's your one mantra that you want to give to the government?
I just want to tell you one thing, that the situation, whatever my colleagues already said, the situation is not too bad. But simultaneously, I warn government that they should also consider track 1 reform also. So to betterment of the industry, which will grow the economy, and ultimately the economy grow, ultimately the money will get from the economy and the industry, and that will be utilized for the track 2 reform.
So basically we need both Amartya Sen and Bhagwati models, compassion and passion for growth.